So you want to shoot videos with your Fujifilm camera, but you don't know where to get started. 2 years ago, I was in your shoes, and after countless Google searches, mistakes, and honestly bad videos, I managed to do it. So in today's video, I want to share with you my process on how to shoot video with your Fujifilm camera. So first, let's talk about what you will need. The first thing that you will need is a camera. I personally use the Fujifilm X-T4, but any camera with video capability will do. The next thing that you are gonna need is a lens to attach to your camera. Any lens can do, however, I would strongly advise either a cine lens or a lens that has good and stable autofocus capabilities. In my case, I often use the Fujifilm 18mm f1.4, but I would also suggest the 16-55 or the 18-55 kit lens. The third thing that you will need is an ND filter. I will explain a bit more in details later in the video how to use that ND filter, but basically it's a piece of glass that you will put in front of your lens to decrease the amount of light that goes through it. I use this particular variable ND filter from Amazon that is a good compromise between price and quality. Check out the link in the description if you're interested. And finally, if you want to record audio, I would also suggest you to get a microphone. I personally used the Rode Video Micro whenever I want to record sound, and I try to place it as close as possible as the subject that I want to take in picture. Alright, so now that we have all the items that we need, let's move to the video settings. First, you need to set your resolution, which is the quality of the image that you want to output out of your camera. Popular resolution are usually 4K or 180p or Full HD. In our case, let's set it to 4K. Now let's move on to the frame rate that you want to use. Typically, you will want to use 24 FPS or 30 FPS. I personally use 30 FPS, and I advise you to do the same. Once you have set your frame rate, you can move on to your bitrate, which is basically the amount of information that you allow your camera to transfer to your SD card. You can either select 100, 200 or even 400 megabit per second. I would suggest you to go for 200 megabit per second to output files that are still good quality without taking too much space. Alright, so now let's move on to the file format. When it comes to the file format, you have three choices: H.265 LPCM, H.264 LPCM, and H.264 AAC. H.265 gives you additional dynamic range and an overall better quality of image. However, it will be harder to process this kind of footage for your computer. In this case, I want you to set it to H.264 AAC, which should be enough for most use cases. When it comes to compression, which basically defines how compressed and small your files will be on the SD card, I will suggest you to go with long GOP for a long group of pictures instead of all intra. All intra will result in much bigger file size, and you don't want to overload your SD card with huge files and run out of memory real quick. Alright, so then we are going to choose either we want to shoot at F-Log, which is Fujifilm flat profile, or if you want to choose Fujifilm's film simulation. If you plan on color grading your footage and taking a lot of time in editing it, I would suggest you to shoot F-Log. However, for most users, and if you're not in need of high dynamic range, I would suggest you to record using Fujifilm film simulation. Fujifilm is well known for its beautiful colors, and taking advantage of that, using let's say Classic Chrome or Provia might help you save a lot of time at first. And of course later you can come back to your setting and try to experiment with F-Log and color grading. Alright, so now let's move on to the audio settings. So you often hear that audio is 50% of a video. So it's important to nail your audio settings. However, I understand that you're a beginner at the moment, so I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information. So we are just gonna make sure that our basing settings are correct at first, and I will make a separate video on the topic of audio only to dive deeper into this subject. For the moment, what I want you to do is to make sure that your audio source is set to mic for microphone, and to set your external audio level at automatic. Eventually you will want to play with those audio level, but for the moment let's first set it to automatic. Alright, so now we are done with the settings. Finally, it's time to move to our exposure. There are three elements that you can play with to adjust your exposure: your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed. When it comes to shutter speed, you may be familiar to the 180 rule, which basically says that your shutter speed should be twice your frame rate. The reason why you want to obey the 180 rule is because of movement. If you want to have a footage with natural looking movement and emulate the way our eyes perceive it, you basically have to set your shutter speed to twice your frame rate. If you're shooting at 30 FPS, then set your shutter speed to 1/60 of a second. And if you're shooting at 24 FPS, then set your shutter speed at 1/48 of a second. It is as simple as that. Next, I want you to adjust your aperture to have the depth of field that you want to have for your particular video. Then I want you to set your ISO to its minimum value. And from there, I want you to rotate your ND filter to adjust your exposure. If you manage to reach a correct exposure for your scene, then you're done and it's time to press record. However, if you keep turning your variable ND filter left and right and still have an underexposed image, then you might need to either increase your aperture or increase your ISO to compensate. On the other hand, if even by turning your ND filter you still get an overexposed image, you might need to either get a stronger ND filter or decrease your aperture. It is all about adjusting all the parameters that you can play with to get the correct exposure for your scene. If you want to know more about exposure and how to control it, I made a dedicated video on this topic right here, so don't hesitate to check it out. Alright, so now you should be ready to shoot videos with your Fujifilm camera. So I hope that this video was helpful to you, and if it was, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more. And if you want to know more about the Fujifilm X-T4 that I'm using to film this video, then check out this video right here where I review this beautiful camera after 1 year of use. See you there!